Hello, and welcome to our workshop. This workshop was previously delivered by SMU's Academic Learning Services Writing Center. As a result, you may hear references to other workshops, be prompted to take part in group activities, or hear references to the active chat from the original delivery of this session. As you follow along, feel free to pause the video and participate in exercises and activities as best you can. We hope you enjoy the workshop.
Okay. The goals of business writing is part one. I think the goal of any writing or any communication overall is to build and maintain relationships. Maybe I sound like a broken record, but that's okay. I am one. Repetition is an important part of my job. And thinking about the goal is, we'll get into some more specific goals, but I think a good overarching or umbrella kind of approach to any kind of writing is to maintain a good relationship, whether that's with your prof, whether that's with your a classmate, a group member, or someone you're trying to sell something to or buy something from. We're going to look at some types of business writing and talk about some of the subtle differences between those types, and then we'll look at some approaches to business writing and do an activity. So, part one, the goals of business writing. Okay, so when you're in university, you may think, my business writing is for a mark. And yes, your academics, of course, you're writing it for a mark. But, all of the work that you do outside of writing an essay, and I think any work that any of us do, whether your work is a business person or a doctor or a lawyer or a teacher, whatever you are, that's your business, right? And I think that there are really good, solid principles that we can adopt regardless of what our business is. But these principles are taken from sort of those agreed upon standards of business etiquette and business writing. So building and maintaining relationships, always the number one thing when you're communicating, if possible. There are really 4 explicit goals of business writing when you're writing and communicating with others. Okay, so we're giving instructions like to get to my store, go straight down Main Street, take a left on Smith, right? Completing a transaction may be, yes, my lawyer has agreed and I'm ready to purchase this home. To persuade someone, think about selling someone a product, selling someone a service, or selling someone an idea, or providing information, right? So you're giving details about who, what, where, when, how, why. So those are sort of the 4 main reasons that people communicate in the business world or as a course of their work. But I want to look at some of the types of writing that those goals are sort of found in. So very comfortable, common form of communication these days, email. I know that you guys are probably really familiar with this mode of communication. Don't even think about it twice. It's second nature. Now, a presentation may create a little more restriction in the body. Maybe this creates a little bit of anxiety. I would really encourage you to think of, every time you speak to someone is an opportunity to practice your public speaking. And, good presentation and good public speaking is being clear and thinking about the experience of your audience while being clear. Okay, so now a report and a case study. These are much more specific genres of writing. You're maybe not be that familiar with those yet, but as in the course of your degree programs, this will be become a very comfortable and standard part of your coursework. So we know what an email is, and I want you to just think for a moment about how these modes of communication, although they all have a similar goal, that is of building, maintaining relationships, and whether it's transactional or instructional, an email kind of looks the same and kind of sounds the same. A presentation, there's specific language that we provide when we're giving a presentation, right? Have to give those sort of verbal segues or connections between sections. We might not do that in a report, or we do it differently using different kinds of cohesive devices that are used in writing versus in speaking. So a report is based more on an observation, something that you've researched and observed. And then a case study is that sort of deep analysis, which often includes an executive summary at the beginning. And that in itself is a genre of writing that I think you're going to get really good at as you go forward in your schoolwork. So these are really the main kinds of communication that you will find yourself using. And I would ask you to just consider how they're similar and how they're different, and that you adopt and adapt your tone and your word choice and your style according to that mode. An email and a presentation, an email is text-based. A presentation is usually a visual based explanation, right? So those are quite different modes, although the goal may be both, may be the same. Maybe I'm completing a transaction, but how does that change according to my mode? Okay. I hope I'm not moving too quickly. I just want to give us enough time for our activity. The last point before your group work is the 5 C's. And this is a tried and true business writing instruction. And you will see this, I've got some handouts on our course shell, but you're going to see this in as you carry on at St. Mary's, I'm sure. So here are the 5 C's. I'm going to talk about them a little bit, one by one. So we have coherent, clear, concise, courteous, and correct. So when I say choose your choice, what I mean is that you cannot talk about everything at once, right? You cannot talk about multiple topics in an email that is, meant to provide a direct instruction. Your message can easily become confused if you do not choose your choice. What is this communication about, and how do I show focus and clarity? So you have to choose your choice. What is this topic, and stick to it. If that means you have to delete items from a presentation, then you delete. If that means that you have to send 2 emails instead of 1, that's okay. Be clear. That means know your audience. The way that you speak to your classmates, new classmates, may be different than the way you speak or communicate with someone who you've gone to school with since you were a child. Writing an email to a professor may look different than writing an email to me, for example. So that's just like knowing that sort of, we say code switching or register switching, like that level and that degree of formality. And, when you skillfully show that you can navigate those levels of formality, it just gives you more confidence in your ability to achieve your goal and have a successful communication. Being concise means finding the right word, not the biggest one. It means finding that language that is right for that time and place and person. And sometimes, inflated language, especially in business writing, is quite discouraged. And sometimes, we think, I have this great word for it and I want to use it. And I would just say, in some ways, my writing or your writing is not about you. It's about the audience and how is that person's experience. You want your audience to feel empowered and in control and smart. and you want to make sure they know every word in your email or in your presentation. Being courteous. Okay, so being polite looks different in different cultures, right? Every culture has politeness conventions or politeness rules, and they may be different than yours. So, for example, as Canadians, you know, it's very common for Canadians to refer to Americans like as being rude, or that they seem kind of harsh, and you know, Americans, of course, have many politeness conventions and rules of their own. And, you know, us saying please and thank you as Canadians 100 times in a conversation, Americans may not consider that to be polite. They may consider it to actually be not clear. So thinking about who you're communicating with, the individual, their culture, their company's culture, or the class culture, just shows a sensitivity and an awareness, and shows that you're in the game for the right reasons. You know, the last point is correct. That means that you should consider writing an email in a program that offers word processing. Like on my Chromebook, my email won't show me spelling or grammar mistakes. So I do not write in my email on my Chromebook. I will write in Word or in Google Doc, and then I will copy and paste it, because it's really important that I show I've paid attention to those details. Okay, we're going to analyze an email. Okay, so before we go into this group work, there's a few things I'd like you to think about and consider. Okay, so we talked about the goals of business communication. Maybe you remember there were 4 that I mentioned earlier. Does anyone remember what are the goals of business communications? We have provide instructions, provide information, to persuade, or transaction. So when you're looking at this email in our activity, I want you to think, what is the goal of the writer? Is there just one? Are there multiple goals? Does that make it less clear? Also, I'd like you to look at the tone. So the way we look at tone is, for example, word choice, using really emotional language, using very positive or very negative language can affect the tone. What about the tone indicates the relationship? So you can look at how punctuation is used. You can look at mechanics, capitalization. I mean, is there anything that makes this email look more casual than it should? And then thinking about the 5 C's: clarity, coherence, cohesion, courteousness, and the last one, how could you rewrite using the elements of the 5 C's? Okay, hey, can you meet next week to talk about the new account with RBC and whatever else you want? I'm free anytime. Just let me know what works for you. Before we meet, can you do the research we talked about? It'll save me a lot of time. Cool? We can meet in my office because it's bigger and more comfortable than yours. LOL. Bring me a coffee when you come. Double. I'll pay for yours too. Here's your text. I want you to analyze your text. How does it look? How does it feel? How does it sound? What kind of changes might you suggest and why? Okay. So I would like to get a bit of feedback from you guys about that email. Sort of impressions and suggestions. So I'd like to talk about the tone of the email. I'd like to talk about the purpose of the email, what changes could be made, So is anybody willing or able to share some of the points they talked about in their group?
I'll talk about some points.
Okay, awesome.
So what we identified was that the email was quite informal with its address of the client at hand. It's also very self-centered on the individual who is sending the email rather than the client. Your priority really should be on the client, the person you're doing the deal with, or you're doing the transaction with at hand.
Well, I mean, if this is your colleague, right? Imagine this
Even
is
if
your
it's your
colleague.
colleague,
If this is your client, you're right, Jack. You've really probably ruined the relationship, right?
exactly.
But if this is your colleague, what do you think about? I really agree with that, and I love that, like that self-centeredness of that email, right? But if this is your colleague, how do you think that? Does that change it all for you?
It really depends on how close you are with your colleague. If you're like best friends with your colleague, then it's pretty okay because you know each other. It's not going to really be formal. Like when you're talking to your close friends, formality is not your top priority.
Yeah, yeah.
But if it were a colleague, let's say like a new colleague, even it's very informal and is really not acceptable, really.
Yeah, problematic, right?
Yeah, it's just not showing great amounts of professionalism.
Yeah,
with the email.
yeah. No, I really appreciate that point about how self-centered it is, and you know, well, is that it, Jack? I'm not gonna fill in the blanks. I want to hear what you guys say. So yeah, that was really great. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Like,
okay.
The only other thing is like using LOL kind of thing. If you can't really get much more of a bad word choice than that.
Yeah.
So really just cut out the double. And the other thing too is that they didn't even give them really an option. They're saying we're meeting at my office. They should have really gave them the option saying they're saying I'm free anytime. Just maybe say, where would you like to meet? My office or yours? What time would you like? My schedule is flexible.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is something about, I mean, even if you are friends with someone, that courtesy, right? That you would say, like, does that work for you?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, I really appreciate that, Jack. Great points. Would anybody else like to add what you guys talked about in your group? There are lots of problems in this email, and there's some good stuff, but there are more problems. Anything else that you guys indicated? Tell, what about the purpose of the email? Is there? Oh yeah, Francis, go ahead.
Yeah. We noted that it was like all like squished together, like there was no like formal greeting or like a formal like goodbye, and it just seems like a bunch of text messages just put together.
Good point. You're absolutely right. The format is wrong. You can't see any kind of like greeting, body, sign off, right? So that format isn't there. And when we see something that looks like an email, it puts us into that frame of mind. When I see something that looks like an essay, I'm in an essay frame of mind, right? So you're absolutely right. The format and therefore is really not of the mode of an email. It does look more like a text. Good point. Yeah. What else is wrong with this email? Can you
formatting of it.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
The formatting of it.
Okay,
it really doesn't have any spaces in between it.
Mm-hmm.
So really, it should be a separate paragraph. So it should really be like one paragraph about the meeting itself, and even mentioning what you'd like to go over in the meeting potentially, like just some points to think about. And then address the time and place. But also, it doesn't really ask if the person has any questions in advance that they would like clarified before the meeting. So those are another few points that I think could be changed.
Yeah, it kind of harkens back to that point you made about it being very much about the writer and not about the receiver's experience. What about an agenda, Brianna? Good point. No agenda. What about the purpose? What is the purpose? Is it information? Is it to inform? Is it transactional? Is it persuasive? Is it instructional? Is it all of them? Is it none of them?
It's a little bit of everything, really. When you look at it, you have instructional information with regards to. Sorry, what's that? You just kind of.
Yeah. So what's the evidence of the instruction?
Well, the instruction, the way they wrote this is that you're meeting at my office.
Yeah.
So really, and then we're meeting about the RBC account.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's really a telling of what they're going to do.
Yeah. And instructions often do sound like that, right? But when you've got instructions mixed in with other goals and you've not clearly separated those in a way that's
paragraphing.
Yeah, exactly. And even a bit of padding, when you tell someone, come to my office, that is a command. You're using the imperative. You're starting with a verb versus like starting with a modal, like, would you like to meet at my office? Are you available?
Exactly.
Could you meet, right? So those could, would, shoulds, those guys can be used to really sort of pad the language with politeness,
exactly.
right? Yeah. What about, there is a request in there that I wanted to talk about.
The double.
What request? Okay, so there's the coffee request, but there's a much bigger request embedded in this email. I wonder if anyone sees it. So yeah, bring me a coffee.
Do the research.
Yeah. So Francis, can you read us that that what is phrased more as a instruction, but is actually a request?
Before we meet, can you do the research we talked about? It'll save me a lot of time. Cool?
Yeah, is that cool with you, Francis?
Pardon?
Is that cool with you?
No.
No. Why not?
Why do I have to do all the research?
Yeah, exactly. Like, is this okay? So here's the thing. If this is my colleague that I know really well, what kind of relationship do we have that they're bossing me around and telling me to do their work, right? And if this is a colleague that I don't know well, what are they doing bossing me around and telling me to do all the work?
It's quite a bold move.
Yeah. Like, I feel that, of course, this email is meant to give lots of obvious examples, but also it's really not that out there, right? The email is meant to show you, like, we do communicate quite casually with our colleagues in North America, but, asking someone to pick me up a coffee, no problem. Asking somebody, and, especially if they're going to buy mine as well, my pleasure. Asking someone to do the research before our meeting because it's going to save me time. That is embedded in that email is potentially a significant piece of work. And if I wanted to request that my coworker do work, I mean, really that would seem kind of strange, and it seems almost like passing the buck or passing the responsibility, right? So how could we ameliorate or amend or make this email better?
You could eliminate the really highly informal language. So and the language is really self-centered, so it'll save me a lot of time. Cool, like that sentence needs to just go. And when it says we can meet in my office because it's bigger and more comfortable than yours, lol. What it really should be, like we talked about earlier, would you like to meet in my office at X time, at what, at the time of your convenience? Even saying that, because then it leaves it to your colleague to make the decision. So in a way, it's still a request, so you can make your schedule around it, but it's a request in a formal and in a quotation mark around nice way.
I mean, we have to request things of our classmates, of our professors. We have to request things, right? And it's a skill for us to request things in ways that show that we understand the politeness conventions or the politeness rules around that, and shows that we are looking to maintain relationships, and saying, could you help me with the research? Maybe I'll do A and B and you do C and D, and if that works for you. If not, please just let me know, right? So adding some of the padding, often I find I'll write an email and then I'll go back to it and say, okay, I just really got to the point. I need to add a bit of padding. And so I'll typically add at the beginning, I hope you had
it's not a blunt force blow.
Exactly. Like, I hope you had a great weekend, or, oh, it was great to have that meeting last week. Hope you're doing well. How's your new puppy? Something that adds that personal touch that shows I'm paying attention and that I'm aware that there's a human being, on the other end of this communication. And yeah. So any other suggestions from the group about how to make this email more effective, more professional, more clear?
The very first word where it says, hey, you should address them by name, have a comma after, then return, go down a few spaces, and then start your message. Because the way it is now, it just, again, that's the informality to the message.
Yeah. The language choice, the word choice, the format, adding some proper language, adding some more language, to pad the request. And you can also, so Brianna says, you can also ask the receiver if they have another location in mind. Exactly. And, it's sort of like a dig, right? We'll meet in my office because it's better than your office. Like,
it's a bit of a flex.
Yeah, right, exactly. So showing a little more conciliation, a little more collaboration in your tone, really valuable skill. And with that, I will say thank you for attending Intro to Business English today. Thank you to Brian for moderating and helping me out. And thank you guys for all of your participation. I really appreciate it so much. And that's it. That's it for Intro to Business English today.